writing. Every story I create for you comes from a lot of hard work, time, and dedication. Sometimes I spend hours thinking about a simple idea, creating the story, improving every detail, and trying to make something interesting for you. I may not have big resources or a perfect setup, but I have one thing: the passion to keep creating for you. I don't make these stories just for myself. I make them because I want you to enjoy them, feel something, and come back for the next story. If you enjoy my stories, please support me with a like, comment, and subscribe. Your one like or one kind comment gives me the motivation to work even harder. I promise I will keep bringing you new, exciting, and emotional stories. You keep watching and I will keep creating.
During university, I had a slew of creepy encounters. This has stuck with me the most. It started during my first class. One day a group of us were walking together along campus and slowly members began branching off. It ended up as just myself and a guy who I was not inclined to befriend, only knew his name, but I didn't want to be rude and not keep walking along with him. He asked me where I was going, and I tell him I normally take a nap between classes and was going into my dorms. He asks if he can see my suite. Normally, this would be a no-brainer red flag, but my particular building was renowned for being fancy and others frequently asked to see inside. I say sure, not wanting to be mean and thinking this guy would take a quick look around and give the typical jealous comments and then leave. We go inside and I show him the basics, doing so in a way that we ended back up at the entrance of the suite. This whole time he's not saying much, and I'm only announcing things dryly. So, I was confident when I said a quick, "It's pretty nice. See you around." Then he was going to take his leave. I turned around and went to my room. I did not show him any rooms or say where anyone stayed. A few minutes later, as I'm sitting my stuff down, I turn around and he's there in the doorway. He's silent. I don't say anything because I do not want to invite him in. I want him to go. I just look at him, then start picking up stuff and moving it around, trying to look busy. He slowly walks a couple of steps into the room and asks, "Have you done the coursework yet?" I tell him no. By this time, I assume he is trying to hang out and tell him again that I'm planning on napping. He doesn't even skip a beat and says, "That's okay. I can watch you sleep and help you with it after." I smile. No tone. Then silence again. I immediately tell him he needs to leave and follow him until he actually went out the locking doors, and I know he can't follow me back in. I told a lot of our friends about this, and they were heavily creeped out and made a point not to leave us alone again, ever. We finished the year out, and I haven't thought about this guy in a long time. I did not know anything about him at all, still only knew his name. Flash forward a year and some change to the next summer when I'm taking a bus ride home from a different part of campus, so it is not my normal route. We get to one of the points where the bus stops and waits until a certain time before it can leave again, and everyone else that had been on the bus gets off at this stop. At this point, the driver starts talking to me, asking me a lot of questions. I did not think anything weird at first and answer what I thought were idle chat questions. So which apartment are you in, and what classes are you taking? Then, as more and more questions just kept coming, I started to feel uneasy with his mannerisms and became extremely vague in my answers. I still don't know if he always intended to tell me this, but he then stopped peppering me with questions and began spilling a story of how his son was in my math class the previous year, and he knew all about me and started giving me a lot of family details. It's at this point that I realize his son is the guy who wanted to watch me sleep. All the details fit, but I had to know for sure, so I asked him if his son was named what his name was. He smiles and says yes. He then mentioned that he would like to start riding bikes with me, and would I ride bikes with him and his son? I was gathering my stuff by this point and had decided to get off the bus. There are 2 doors, one at the front and one halfway, which was closest to me. The doors stay open while the bus is at these stops so people can hop off and on, and the driver normally gets off and takes a break. As I'm getting my stuff and getting up, the halfway door shuts. I look again at the driver, an older man but much larger than my petite frame and build. He is now standing facing me, but the front door is still open. He asks again, "Will you ride bikes with us?" I want off the bus and think the only way is to pacify him. I say yes and make my way to the front door, not knowing how to get around him. He looks pleased but asks where I'm going. I try and tell him I've decided to walk home, but he still blocks my way and tries to talk me out of it. I'm firm in that I want to walk from here, but he will not move. I'm standing in front of him wishing to move, but my body is frozen in place. Slowly, he decides, "Give me your number, and I'll let you go." I really don't want to do this, but I also want off this bus immediately. My first thought is to give a fake, but I'm also glad I didn't, as he immediately dials the number. It was a test. Seeing my phone ring and watching me save his contact, he moves enough that I slide by and make it off the bus. After making it home, I go to block his number and already have multiple missed calls and a voicemail of just him breathing. The situation was reported and I did not see him en route for a long time. But around a year later, I was getting on another bus and noticed he was back. I never covered my face and backed off a public transit. Faster. This is from my sophomore year of high school. Take in mind that some of the reasons why the whole scenario lasted so long was because I was extremely shy and was having problems with extreme anxiety. This whole experience has helped me learn to speak up for myself. It was the beginning of the school year and I had a gym class as my first period. I went to class normally for a few days, but I had noticed that some girl had been staring at me off and on. I didn't think it was anything to worry about. A big mistake on my part. One day before class started, we were all hanging out in one corner of the gym listening to our teacher's story of how he tripped and fell in a huge puddle of mud. I was sitting on a pile of yoga mats staring off into space, but still paying attention. I then heard a girl's voice say, "Teacher, I have a story to tell too. I finally have found my best friend that I haven't seen in years, and she doesn't even recognize me." I was snapped out of my staring spell and looked towards the voice to find that she was pointing directly at me. I foolishly said, "Oh, no, I remember you," and read off the name that was written across her gym shirt, Ellie, because I didn't want to seem like a jerk for not remembering her. Ellie instantly brightened up that I remembered her, and then proceeded to lift herself up off the yoga mats and sit uncomfortably close to me, enough that our entire bodies were squished together. I didn't say anything because I didn't feel it was necessary to cause a huge problem out of this, because there was obviously something up with her mentally, and I didn't want to be rude about it. The class went on, and Ellie and I were not in the same group, so I didn't have any problem with her that day. The next few days, we didn't have any assigned class groups, so Ellie was trailing behind me like a dog. She was starting to get extremely protective and forceful with me. I don't get cold very easily, but she insisted that I wear her jacket and would not leave me alone until I finally wore it. She also started to say things about hurting my actual friends, which was the final straw for me. Do whatever you want to me, but as soon as you bring my friends into it, I'm going to do something about it. I was finally going to bring it up to our principal. Putting that whole thing behind, our class today had the option of either volleyball or walking around the perimeter of the room. I decided to just walk around the room and had been doing that for around 15 minutes, until I sat on the ground by the bleachers to tie my shoes. Ellie dropped down to the ground too and watched me with extreme interest. All of a sudden, she grabbed my wrist and held our forearms together. "We have the same veins. You want to know why? Because we were in the womb together. I used to hug you when you were scared in the womb," she said. This line freaked me out a lot at the time. because 1, our veins look nothing alike. She had one visible vein, while mine branch out into multiple. And 2, we look nothing alike, and she was a year older than me. I decided to run off to the bathroom before I really freaked out, and stayed in there for almost the rest of the class. I returned later for the end of class roll call and left to go to the locker room. Ellie got dressed quickly and was just staring at me half naked getting dressed. It made me really uncomfortable. I lied and told her that I had to leave quickly because I had to meet with my boss at Olive Garden, and hightailed it out of there into my next class. My next class teacher, who I trust dearly, had called me up to talk to her privately in her class, and she said that Ellie has been talking about me non-stop in the class that she has her in. She recommended me to go to the police as soon as possible, and she'll talk to the principal. This scared the life out of me. What in the absolute God did my teacher know about Ellie that she would tell me to go to the police of all people? I called my mom and skipped the rest of the day. I stayed home the next day and went to the police station with my mom. They brought us into a room and I started off with just telling them the basic story of what was going on. I didn't even say her name. The guy that was talking to us said, "Ellie Smith?" I was dumbfounded. How did he know exactly who I was talking about? He went on talking about how she's in the police station a lot, but couldn't go into specifics because she was a minor. This didn't help with my anxiety. What did she do to be in the police station multiple times? The police couldn't really do anything, so the only thing I could do was switch my class. I was angry because I had made a few good friends in that gym class and I had to restart with a whole new class, but at least I was away from Ellie. The new class went fine, but over the course of the year I would always run into Ellie in the halls. My friend even saw her turn around and look at me with one of the most terrifying faces she had ever seen in real life. She would always yell things along the lines of, "I'm going to get you," which was extremely unnerving for me. I didn't want her near me or my friends, so I began stepping up and telling the vice principal himself whenever one of these instances occurred. This kept happening over the course of my sophomore year. I was hoping that she would forget about me because I had figured out that we had never actually met before that gym class. I never hung out with anyone other than my friend Paige in the time Ellie said we were best friends, and I even checked all my yearbooks. Not one thing even mentioned Ellie Smith. The morning of the first day of junior year, I ran into her before I even started my first class. I tried not to make eye contact. Later that day, the principal called me in and told me that Ellie said I flipped her off, which I didn't. I didn't even look at her. This whole game with threats and random incoherent screeches continued on through my junior year as well, and I feel like part of the whole high school experience was taken from me because I spent a lot of the time trying to figure out how to avoid her. She graduated and thankfully was gone during my senior year. This whole experience has honestly both traumatized me and helped me grow as a person. I learned how to assert myself more than I ever had done before, but I still swear I see her out of the corner of my eye. It's caused some paranoia that still hasn't gone completely away. There was a girl that's been stalking and harassing me since October of 2018. We were in the same class at high school 6 years ago. She was super shy, never spoke in class, and barely had any friends. I can't remember speaking to her more than once or twice through all of high school. To me, she didn't even exist. Then all of a sudden, many months ago, I woke up to a message in my Facebook inbox that read, "F white people." She is Asian. From what country I do not know. I thought this was really strange, so I replied back, "What's going on?" She had blocked my messages. I decided to just ignore it and go on with my life. About a month had passed and I woke up to yet another message in my inbox. She had sent me a screenshot of an Instagram account in my name. No posts or followers, just an empty account with my name. I kind of freaked out a little and tried to reply, but yet again she had blocked my messages. I tried to find the account on Instagram but couldn't. My name is very uncommon, so the possibilities that this was another guy's account was very slim. It certainly wasn't my account. I was very confused and kind of scared that she had created an account with my name and would post things pretending to be me. I contacted one of her high school friends and asked if she could deliver a message for me since I had no way of reaching her. To my surprise, they weren't friends anymore and hadn't spoken in months. I told my closest friends about what had been happening, and they told me that they had received some strange messages too. I was seriously confused by this point. This one girl who nobody talked to or had any kind of relationship with was sending pictures of Instagram accounts, weird memes, and 3-word sentences that made zero sense to me and many of my friends. I tried to think of why she did this. Had we treated her badly at some point? But I couldn't think of anything that we had done. I remember giving her a piece of gum one day, but that's about as close as any communication happened between us. I decided I would just try to ignore her and hope she wouldn't send me any more messages. But then around Christmas time, I woke up to my Facebook exploding with notifications and messages. I think I had around a good 100+ notifications. She had been sharing all of my profile pictures and posts. I'm seriously freaking out at this point and opened my messages. I've received 50 to 60 messages that all read, "End your life." I tried to message her again, but surprise, surprise, she had blocked my messages. I was becoming really angry at this point. I clicked on her Facebook profile to block her and get rid of her for good. Before I went to block her, I scrolled down her wall. She had been sharing literally hundreds of posts and pictures of me, my friends, and some other people I had no idea who they were. I did some detective work and found her sister's Facebook profile and decided to send her a message. I took screenshots of everything she had done and sent it to her, asking why she was doing this. She freaked out when she saw what her crazy stalker sister had done. The stalker had deleted her sister on Facebook because of an argument they had had around October when this all started. So, she hadn't seen anything she had done. She promised me she would talk to her crazy stalker sister and make her stop. I received a message from her sister a few hours later that she had talked to the stalker and promised she would stop, and she apologized. I was so happy this finally would be over, and I thanked her. Another few months passes, and we are now in February of 2019. I hadn't received any messages since I'd talked to her sister, and I had honestly forgot about everything that had happened. 2 days ago, I was playing some games with my friends on my PC and talking on Discord. My phone was on the table and I saw it light up once. I had received a notification. I wouldn't bother to check it before the game was done. A few seconds after, I get another one and another one. I could see my phone in the corner of my eye. Notifications came swarming in. Then I remembered the crazy stalker girl and got a really awful feeling in my stomach, praying this wasn't her again. I stopped playing and picked up my phone. Notifications still coming in. The stalker was sharing my pictures and posts yet again, and all had a caption like, "End your life and I hope you die." I instantly blocked her. A few minutes later it happened again. Someone with another username was sharing my pictures. I blocked that account instantly. She had created almost 10 accounts and I was desperately blocking all of them as fast as I could as soon as I saw a notification. I sent her sister a message again and told her I was going to report this to the police if she wouldn't stop. She told me she would talk to her. Angry, confused, and kinda scared, I went back to the gaming session talking to my friends about it. I went to sleep a few hours later. I woke up late the next day. It was hard to sleep after thinking about all that was happening. My cousin had received some messages from my crazy stalker. She had told him that I owed her money. I kept my calm and told him about everything and said that he should just go with it. I wanted to see where this was going. She thought my cousin was my father. He is a lot older than me, and I could see why she would think that. She had a long conversation where she claimed that I had both stolen and hacked her phone and lent money from her, and that I was the reason she lost her scholarship and had to move. She said I owed her $10,000, which later became $50,000, and then again she raised the amount to $100,000 later in the conversation. All of this, of course, is some crazy lie. I'm so confused as to why she is doing this to me. I have no idea what I have done to her, and I'm going to report this to the police tomorrow. I'm really scared of what she might accuse me of next, or if she is going to show up on my door someday. All this is happening 6 years after the last time I saw her. So, update. I just came back home after talking with the police. They told me I had a strong case and could press charges if I wanted to. I decided not to do it for now. I don't want to make it harder than it has to be. I will give her one last chance to stop. They will call her today and tell her to stop or face charges. Any further contact with me or my family will cause her to see consequences. Either way, I'm pretty much guaranteed to get her a restraining order if she doesn't comply. I would also like to add that I do not think she's a violent person. She's never threatened my life directly, nor have I ever feared for my life. This plays a huge part of why I didn't press charges. I firmly believe that something terrible has happened to her within the last year, and that she is really sick and in need of help. Her family knows about the situation, and it's up to them or the authorities to make sure she gets the help if she needs it. What bothered me the most about this whole situation was the false accusations, and not the sharing of pictures and messages itself. I'm happy with my decision, and I hope I made the right call. This is my mom and dad's story. It was their honeymoon. They married in August 1980 in Australia, and they were driving along the Bruce Highway into a city called Rockhampton, Queensland. It was late at night, around 8 p.m.-ish, and they had been driving most of the day. There was a very long stretch of road before you come into the city that is just bush, kilometers of it. At night, the bush can be very scary. They had not passed cars for some time, probably an hour or two. Out of nowhere, headlights appeared a long way behind them in their rearview mirror. That's fine, whatever. They keep driving as normal. Then the headlights start getting closer and closer. Dad is driving and says something like, "What a bloody turkey. Look how fast he's driving." The car comes right up to them, with their high beams on, and follows them for about 5 minutes like that. Mom and Dad have a conversation about why can't the person just overtake them. Then the car completely backs off, like slows right down almost to a complete stop, hangs back about 1 to 2 kilometers away for a good 10 to 15 minutes. Mom and Dad both think that was super weird and creepy, but whatever, they just keep driving. Then the car speeds up again, tailgating, high beams, and sort of swerving into the other lane as if to overtake them. This goes on for another 5-ish minutes. Mom and Dad are both really scared now. Remember, this is the days before mobiles and cell phones, and besides, there would have been no reception in that area to call for help, even if they had them. It's not over yet. The car backs off again, but not as far as before. The car hangs back there for about a minute before hitting the gas and absolutely flying past Mom and Dad and finally overtaking them. There appeared to be one person in the car, but they couldn't really see what they looked like. There was also no number plate on the car to identify it, and I know Dad had told me heaps of times before. I actually can't remember what sort of car it was now. I feel like it was a sort of sedan thing, definitely white, and the car disappears up the road as if it were never there. Mom and Dad are shaken to their core, but pleased it was seemingly over. Not done yet. The road now becomes a bit more windy. Previously it was almost straight. Mom and Dad come round a corner and the car is parked in the middle of the road, facing them, high beams on, both driver and passenger doors wide open, and the man, they could now see it was a man, standing in front of the car with his arms spread wide, spread as if to make them stop the car. Mom was screaming at Dad, "Just hit him, don't stop, just hit him." And my dad, being the bloody hero that he is, did not stop and drove around the man's car on the right-hand side of it, which be the passenger's side as it was parked facing them. The man tried to get in front of Dad, I assumed to stop him from driving off, as he made this maneuver but couldn't quite get there in time. He was very close to the car and Dad nearly hit him. Dad absolutely floored it. He said he was doing around 130 to 140 kilometers per hour to get away from the man. They aren't sure how long they drove like that for, but they didn't slow back to the speed limit until they started to come into the city limits. They made it to their hotel and parked the car at the back of the hotel so that you couldn't see it from the road because it was on the side of the highway and passing traffic could see the cars parked there. Mom was quite hysterical and told the reception lady what had happened. They called the police and reported it, but they never found the car or the driver. Fast forward many years later, Mom was watching the news and Ivan Milat had just been arrested. Mom screamed and called Dad into the lounge room. They both agreed it was the man they saw. They were absolutely adamant. I can't find evidence to suggest Ivan Milat was active in Queensland during that time, but I certainly won't call Mom and Dad liars because of what they saw. I imagine it was another creepy hillbilly who looked very similar to the backpack murderer. A few years ago, I was watching a movie at my mom's place, who at the time she was staying on site at an animal rescue. The rescue was a house on a couple of acres that had been converted into a rescue. The house itself more or less functioned as a normal home, with the exception of a few rooms that had been converted into kitten nurseries or to keep hutches in. But the backyard crisscrossed with pens for the rescue animals. There were surrounding properties, but it was kilometers away from the nearest station and very difficult to reach without a car. It was about 9 p.m., post-dinner, and all manner of creatures were sleeping soundly in their beds, most notably 2 dingo heeler crossbreeds. These 2 dogs belonged to the owner and had the run of the property, sleeping on kennels on the veranda. They were little darlings once you got to know them, but quite intimidating when you first met, growls and all. Opening onto the same veranda was a laundry that functioned as a second kitchen. As this laundry opened from the backyard, the rescue staff kept the food, dishes, and utensils for the animals' meals in the laundry rather than tracking muck through the house on their way to the kitchen. We were watching the movie on my laptop, about 15 to 20 minutes into You're Next, when someone knocked at the front door. My mom immediately told me not to answer it, but when I asked why, she had no explanation. My mom has pretty great intuition, but since the dogs weren't going off, I answered anyways. I swung open the wood paneled door, but left the fly screen locked as a concession to her. A soft male voice came out of the dark. The porch light apparently needed replacing. I could make out his height, 5'9", body shape, thin as heck, a beard and not much else. He asked for someone whose name I'd never heard. When I told him there was no one here by that name, he said he was waiting for a taxi. But then he said he needed a taxi and asked to come inside to call one. His speech was meandering. By this time, my mum had joined me by the door, pointing at the window. The door was one of those single panels with glass windows from door to ceiling beside it. As we had the lights on inside and it was pitch black night outside, we couldn't see the caller, but he had had all the time in the world to see us. Worried, she gave the caller directions to a payphone down the street. The caller insisted he needed to come inside to call a taxi. I insisted he use the payphone instead. He became quite angry and demanded we let him in. Afraid about being the only ones home that evening, my mum finally snapped and told him she'd call the police if he didn't go away, already dialing 000 on her mobile. Eventually he stopped arguing and the prolonged silence suggested he was gone. Not wanting to return to the couch, which was in full view of the door's glass windows, as well as from the veranda, the back wall was floor-to-ceiling glass panels, we occupied our time in the kitchen, waiting. We heard another knock on the door. Nervous, we peered through the glass until we could make out blue and red flashing lights. We opened the door to 2 officers and started relaying the story. Suddenly the officer closest to the door asked, "Is this yours?" We peered around the door frame. A knife lay on the windowsill, a knife my mother immediately recognized as being used for the rescue animals' meal prep. The officers said the description reminded them of a local homeless man who was known for drinking far too much and sleeping it off in people's sheds. As such, they were quick to dismiss it as a serious threat, but afterwards my mother and I kept making creepy realizations. That knife came from the laundry in the backyard. How did the stranger get it without setting off the dogs? Without setting off any of the rescue animals? How long had he been hanging around the backyard getting to know the animals? Had he been watching us, too? What exactly did he plan to do with that knife if we had opened the door? I've encountered a person that I'll call Window Man that has really messed me up. This happened in the summer of 2018, so about 8 months ago. Some background story to help better understand the situation I was in and the layout of the apartment. My mom and I moved into this one-room apartment with one of my mom's colleagues, all females, for a short period of time, about 3 months to be able to save up some money for another apartment that we currently live in. So the apartment had a small bathroom and shower, a kitchen merged with the living room, a small room separated by a sliding door, and a windowed balcony. We lived on the first floor, and even I, being the short 5'4" girl, managed to climb up into the window when I forgot my keys at home. Since the colleague needed some privacy, she chose to live in the small room. My mom would sleep on the couch in the living room, and I'd sleep on the balcony on a mattress. Now, when I would lay on my mattress, from my point of view, I'd see the living room and the couch on my right and the windows on my left, though there were some behind me that I wasn't really able to see. Now, the actual story, we moved in, and everything was going great the first month or so. I felt quite safe, even though I was very suspicious from the very start of the windows since we lived on the first floor. And I should mention that I've never experienced anything paranormal, nor have I had sleep paralysis before. So one night I wake up, or at least I think so. I can't move. I can only blink my eyes and move my head. I look over to the windows and see what looks like a third of a man's head and a hand peeking through the window. I tried to scream and get up, but I couldn't move or do anything. I was so terrified. I saw the man slowly closing the window as if he was trying to not make any sound and lower his head, as if he were leaving. I was freaking out but still couldn't move. I saw my mom on my right, sleeping on the couch, and on my left my hand was hanging off the mattress and my cat was headbutting it, as if he was trying to wake me up. I tried to scream again a few times, but it doesn't work. I'm hysterical at this point, and I feel tears welling up in my eyes. Suddenly I wake up. I shoot up from my bed, my cat still next to the mattress and my mom still on the couch, sleeping in the same position I've seen her in. I look out the window, panicking, and it's locked from the inside, just like I left it before going to sleep. I unlocked it and opened it, making sure that there's nobody outside. I close and lock the window and lay back down, sobbing. I just cried myself to sleep that night. A few days later, I've decided to tell my mom about the dream. I didn't want to at first because I thought that she wouldn't pay much attention to it. But since it had me so on edge, I told her, and just as I expected, she told me that I'd been listening to too many horror stories and didn't take me too seriously. After maybe a week, I forgot about the dream and moved on. And then one evening, everything was going fine. I was preparing myself for the next day since I had to do a big presentation in front of the whole class, and I wanted to look my best. It was about midnight. I took a shower, brushed my teeth, and went to sleep as usual. My mom was still up on her phone, but about to go to sleep. I doze off peacefully. But suddenly, I wake up for no reason and have the massive urge to look behind me at the windows. To my horror, I saw a tall man in my window, about halfway in, with one leg almost on the floor. I panicked and thought that I was dreaming again, but quickly realized that I can move, so no, I wasn't dreaming. Still being in a state of fear and confusion, I whispered, "Oh my God." and to my complete horror, the man looked up, all dark but eyes shining in the moonlight, put on the creepiest ear-to-ear grin, put a finger to his lips and said, "Shh," in the most menacing way ever. I had no idea what to do, so I said louder, "Oh my God," and then I jumped and screamed, and started screaming like a banshee. The guy got startled and almost fell back, so I took the opportunity and closed and locked the window, just as he was about to try to get back in. My screaming woke my mom up, and she ran up asking what had happened. I started nervously explaining all that had happened, and then we saw the dude climb up to our window again, but the one right next to me, trying to open it. As I saw that, I screamed even louder, and as he was opening it, I pushed him and he fell down, calling me every name under the sun. He then tried to make up some terrible excuse, but in my panic state, I started yelling at him at the top of my lungs to get out. I kept on yelling for about 5 minutes like a total crazy person until the guy finally said something along the lines of, "Fine then," almost as if I was obliged to let him in, and started walking away. I slammed all the windows shut and locked them, sat down on my mattress, and proceeded to sob loudly as my mom was next to me, trying to calm me down. We thought that was it, but a few minutes later I saw him again, climbing up our balcony, and I started screaming again, opened one of the windows and yelled so loud that I almost lost my voice. I closed and locked the windows, and my mom and I went to the guard to tell him what had happened. I described the man to him as best that I could, but since it was dark, I couldn't say much about his appearance. He told us to just go home and stay calm, that he'll handle the situation. When we were going back, we saw about 8 neighbors of ours standing outside wondering what had happened. They all gave us sympathetic looks as we went back home. My mom gave me some medicine to help me calm down, and I was crying and shaking vigorously for about an hour until I was finally so exhausted that I just went to sleep with her, since I didn't want to sleep on the balcony anymore. The next day I showed up to school looking like trash, and when I told someone what happened, they either didn't believe me or would brush it off, saying, "It's fine, you're all right now." After a few days, my mom confronted me about it and said she was sorry that she didn't take my dream seriously, though I wasn't mad at all, just shocked. She said that she was just about to fall asleep but woke up to me screaming. She told me that my screams were the most blood-curdling ones she had ever heard in her life, but the scariest part is that I woke up for no reason. I just had the massive urge to look back. There was absolutely no noise when the man opened the window and was climbing in. I even asked my mother if she had heard anything, and she said that no, it was absolutely silent. Who knows what the man would have done if I hadn't have woken up, though I'm glad I didn't have to find out. The fact that also really shook me is that I had a dream of something similar happening about 3 weeks before it actually happened in real life. Though sadly I don't know what happened to that man, if he was arrested or not. We never saw him again. But either way, I'm just glad that we moved out of that apartment. Soon, later. So one day about 6 years ago on a YouTube comment section, which I am convinced comprises the bowels of the internet, there was some guy posting full of bravado and self-praise about everything under the sun, while putting other people down in a fashion that I found unacceptable, even though he did have excellent grammatical and linguistic skills. In particular, he was singing his praises about his chess-playing abilities, which he clearly took much pride in. Being the snarky booger that I am, I called him out on it, since he was definitely over the top and it sounded like a load of garbage. I mean, the guy stated that he was one of the top chess players in the world and went on and on about it, which I highly doubt was true. Really, it was nothing more than the typical playful banner of noise and nastiness that is YouTube comment sections. This guy, however, had narcissistic personality disorder. During the few comments we exchanged, he admitted as much, but thought it was one of his biggest strengths rather than weaknesses, and saw no reason to get help for it. From my understanding of NPDs, this is not uncommon. Anyways, having angered this guy, he made it his mission for about 4 weeks to research me extensively. By extensively, I mean that he probably made me his full-time job. I try to keep my social media accounts quite separate by using different usernames and posting few details about myself, but within the first week, this guy managed to locate most of my accounts and spent hours and hours posting insulting, nasty comments in response to my YouTube videos, my tweets, my comments, my Facebook comments, etc. He doxed me, finding my PhD math thesis, posting it online repeatedly, and criticizing my methodology, which was ridiculous. My PhD thesis was nominated for awards and laid out the foundation of a new area of combinatorics. I mean, this means that the dude read my PhD thesis, several hundred pages, just to criticize me. Given that it's in math, that alone is incredibly creepy. He responded to every YouTube video I had posted, taunting me with nasty comments, and replied to hundreds of my posts, even 5+ years old, attacking me on every detail of anything I said. We were talking small typos to some unintentional grammatical errors and a few bursts of outrage. I'm a gay man on many LGBT rights websites. It's hard to sometimes not be frustrated. I mean, this guy must have spent hundreds of hours researching me and posting in response to me from fairly old posts. While nobody else seemed to care, it was terrifying to me to get daily notifications from him, posting my full name everywhere with detailed information about my location and life. Fortunately, I live in a different continent than he did, even though he made some threats to come visit me. I figured it was best to ignore him, but it went on for, as I said, about 4 weeks, until some woman online, and a very talented chess player, made the mistake of insulting him about his grandiose delusions of being a master chess player, at which point he thankfully shifted sights to her. I messaged her privately and warned her about this unstable guy, but he still stalked her for several months, doxing her and demanding that she play him games of chess online at the threat of more doxing, telling her that she would play him on such a server at such and such a time, or else she would forfeit and be scorned. Much of the time, she said she had never heard of the obscure servers he mentioned, but he demanded that she comply. I finally lost track of him, but his posts remained online, containing all my personal information, which is disturbing, seeing as I try to keep my social media accounts and my real life as separate as I can manage. I'm not ashamed of anything I say online, but I want the division and some reasonable level of anonymity all the same. So, to the crazy dude, proud of his narcissistic personality disorder, I hope we never meet again, and I hope that others remain safe from you. I've since learned to be much more careful about my online interactions, and to not push buttons just for the sake of doing so, because sometimes it just isn't safe. This happened in 2006 in Provo, Utah. 2 childhood friends and I had just moved from a small town to start college. There are 2 colleges in the area, one in Brigham Young University, predominantly Mormon population, and the other was a small state college at the time. It's now a university. Of course, us non-Mormon boys end up finding an amazing old house for rent right in the epicenter of Zubyville, a term used by non-BYU kids referring to students at BYU. It's loosely based on the premise that at one time the students weren't allowed to leave the campus, therefore they were trapped there like zoo animals. Knowing that we are technically in the territory for approval housing for BYU standards, we figured we were in a pretty alright area. Bizarre area, but nothing crazy. We literally were the only party house I knew of within a few square miles. One day during our first weekend at the house, we hear someone speak loudly in front of our house, so naturally we investigate. We find a man, I'd say in his early 40s, doing pull-ups from a limb of our tree. He sees us looking out the open door and yells for us to come introduce ourselves since we were his new neighbors. This guy was ripped, not just for a 40-something-year-old. I'm saying you can see every fiber of his muscles. As we approach, I reach out my hand and introduce myself. He quickly smacks my hand away and firmly says, "Never touch a black man's hand." I gave a short-lived giggle as I realized he was dead serious. To clarify, he was African American. He then introduces himself as Sherrod, the gatekeeper of heaven, but his real name is Alan. I've been sent there by God himself to keep anyone but the almighty white man out of heaven. He tells us he is in Jesus' original body, but he has adapted it to be fit for defending heaven, that his arms are his rifle stocks. When I ask him where he lives, sure enough, he points to the very next house. Great. I never felt threatened by the guy, but also always kept my wits about me when he was around. I didn't know the volatility of his mental state. Weeks go by with small interactions. Him doing push-ups in our grass, pull-ups from our tree while sharing ridiculous stories about his past. He explained to us that you must put your heart against Mother Earth to live a long, healthy life, and that if he doesn't do it, bad things will happen. This leads to when things starts going from comical to creepy. We had noticed that we hadn't seen him in our yard for a few days, so when we saw him walking out of his house, my buddy yelled at him, "I haven't seen you working out. You better get on it, or bad things will start to happen." Sherrod visibly starts limping over, explains that he was riding his bike back from shooting pool. Jesus also taught him how to play pool and helped him fight off a motorcycle gang while he was there. And some woman, the Antichrist, had seen him coming and stuck her foot into his spokes and sent him flying, and he landed on his heart, so he needs to give it time to heal. The way he told the story was hilarious. He didn't mean it to be, but it took everything we had not to bust up laughing. Well, as bad random fortune would have it, Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, died of a freak accident the following day. My buddy and I were getting home from work right at the same time the following day when Sherrod comes running over. "You knew!" Pointing right at my friend. "You knew that I wasn't putting my heart to the ground and something bad was going to happen." We didn't know about Irwin's death, so we're both thinking, oh, what happened? What has he done? "Mother Earth couldn't feel my heartbeat, so she had to take a person of nature to remind me that I could never stop. She took that crocodile hunter. The crocodile hunter." This is when he decided we were more than just neighbors. We were prophets. He named my friend Peepsight because he can see the future. He named me Honcho. He said I was very special and am the equivalent of God on earth, and that everyone, including him and Peepsight, must worship me. Okay, weird. But this guy clearly is mentally unstable. I have an aunt with paranoid schizophrenia, so I'm thinking with super qualified medical knowledge that he suffers from the same thing. This is exactly something she would say. But instead of me being God, it would be Axl Rose. As weird as things are getting with the guy, we have no reason to fear him. He is always very energetic and happy to see us. I mean, he would never do anything bad to a god or prophet, right? But he did get weirder by the day. The day after Sherrod gave us our new titles, I hear Peepsight yell for me in a nervous tone to come to the back door. There they stood. Sherrod is opening a bottle of olive oil and telling my buddy to take his shirt off. He's telling us he needs to anoint us. "I gotta bless those wings," he said. At this point, I'm thinking this whole thing has run its course and is now just plain annoying. We both tell him no and absolutely not taking our shirts off so you can rub oil on us. We settle on letting him rub a drop on our foreheads, hoping that will make him leave us alone. He gave me the bottle of olive oil and said I can now start blessing those who deserve it, and told my friend that he needs to protect the house and to make everyone who comes over say, "Praise Jesus." If they can't or won't say it, it's because they're demons. He knocked on our door the very next day and asked if he could come in. Friend yelled, "Let me hear you say praise Jesus." He swore and walked away. Guess that wasn't weird at all. Weeks go by with the average interactions. We've all been pretty disengaging with him as, like I said, the hilarity of the situation is worn off. One afternoon while loading my suitcase into my car when he pops up out of nowhere. "Where are you going?" And this is where the weirdest stuff happened with Sherrod, and the only time I felt nervous that something might go down. He pulls out a bag of razor blades and asks if I can do him a favor. He tells me that Jesus ordered him to save all his razors he uses to shave his head, and that one day someone important will come along that can take them and dump them into the ocean for him. Yeah, not gonna happen. I tell him there's no way I will be getting a bag of razors past security, and I would never dump anything into the ocean, let alone razor blades. He tells me that Jesus will make sure security won't find the bag and nothing bad will happen if they are in the ocean. I'm adamant that this is not going to happen, and with every no, I can see him get a little angrier, a little more intense. This was the anger from desperation, and you know the saying, desperate times call for desperate measures. So, this put me on high alert. I mean, he literally has hundreds of razor blades in his hand. God knows what kind of disease you could get if one of those cut you. He truly believed this is how the story was supposed to go. After what seemed like an hour-long discussion/argument, it was probably 10 minutes in reality. He was defeated. He stormed off, muttering beneath his breath that I couldn't make out. Turned and screamed obscenities at me multiple times, but that was the end of the conversation. After spending a week in Hawaii, a week without dealing with the crazy neighbor, anxiety of having to deal with him hit while on my way home. However, luck was on my side. While I was gone, Sherrod was arrested. I can't remember the exact charges, but it was bad. I want to say some form of assault and various drug charges as well. We also found out this wasn't the first time, and that the house next door was a halfway house. So this happened about 6 months ago. I'm originally from a town in the north of the UK, but I was living in a different part of the country at the time for university. I was just going into my second year, so I had moved from student accommodations, like halls, to a house share with 4 other girls. We were in a pretty nice house in a small dead-end street, and all the shops and bars were at the end of our street. I was in a bedroom that was on the bottom floor and at the front of the house. It had originally been a living room, but had been changed into a bedroom for student housing. Because it used to be a living room, the window was a huge bay window that took up the entire length of the front wall. The house had a big driveway and a front garden, both with fences around. This meant that you couldn't walk past the front of the house without intending to be there. You would have to walk up the driveway. I had been living in the house for about 2 weeks when this happened. On this particular night, there was only 2 of us in, as our other 3 roommates had gone home for the weekend. The other girl that was in had a second-floor bedroom, also on the front of the house. It was around 2 a.m. and I was sat in bed watching Netflix. I didn't usually stay up this late, but I was talking to a new boy at the time, and I would often stay up late just to talk to him. Sad, I know, but new relationships are exciting. I remember wanting to go to sleep at about 12:30 and deciding to stay up for a bit longer to talk to him, and now I'm so glad that I did. At this time, I was quite naive and didn't really think much about the dangers of not locking doors and leaving windows open. I grew up in a very nice area where we didn't even really have to lock our doors, and so I still wasn't out of this mindset. This experience has definitely changed that. Because of this, I had one of my windows slightly open and my curtains were open. The curtains didn't matter too much because the way the house was built, the garden and trees were right in front of my window, meaning no one could see in unless they stood directly in front of it. Being naive, I didn't think there was a possibility that anyone would try to. I was half lying down, half sitting up in bed with my laptop in front of me. I didn't have my laptop on too high a volume as, although she was upstairs, there was another girl in the house and I wanted to be respectful. All of a sudden, I saw a shadow go past my window, like a person walking past. I immediately froze. Like I mentioned earlier, there was no way someone could just walk past unless they walked down my driveway and were specifically coming to my house. I thought maybe someone had walked down the wrong driveway or was possibly cutting through and was going to jump the fence to another house. Something didn't sit right about this at all, however, so I left my laptop running and just looked at the window for a second. I couldn't see out the window at all since it was so dark outside, but I could make out shadows on the wall just next to it. For a second there was nothing. Then a shadow of a man went past. Then the shadow of another man about 2 seconds afterwards. At this point, I knew something was wrong, and I shut my laptop immediately in the hope that if they looked in the window, they wouldn't see me. A bit of time went past, maybe like a minute or two, and I just sat in the pitch black waiting to see if I saw anything else. After this bit of time went by, another shadow of a man went past my window in the opposite direction, as if they had both walked in front of my window into the back of the house, but only one came back. I was certain at this point that they were doing something wrong, but for some reason I could not move. My brain was trying to process a million things at once, and I was so scared that I froze. I felt like if I moved, then they would know I was there, and I had no idea whether this was a good thing or a bad thing. For all I knew, they could have been hoping for a young 19-year-old girl to be inside, and I didn't want to run the risk of letting them know that there was. I was also completely naked under my covers, and it definitely crossed my mind that if I got up and they could see in the windows, they would see me. After what felt like an eternity of just sitting, waiting, I heard a loud bang on my window. It sounded like someone had hit something such as a rock off the window with force. I assumed they were trying to break the window and panicked hugely but still couldn't move. I can't explain what was going through my mind, but it was almost like I was waiting for a completely definitive thing to happen before I got up, as if I was being overdramatic or something. After the loud noise, I would say maybe 30 seconds went past, and then all of a sudden my curtains started moving, and I see a hand come round the side of them to get them out of the way. They were big curtains, and my openable windows were on either side of the big window, meaning they were slightly blocked even by the open curtains. I then looked over to the curtains and see a figure of a man climbing through my window. He was halfway through my window with the top half of his body inside my room. This is when my mind finally decided that this was a fight or flight situation, and I shot up and ran towards my door on the other side of the room. It was locked, so I had to fumble for the key, turn it, and then open the door and run, all the while making a huge amount of noise. I ran up the stairs and knocked on my roommate's room. Still completely naked, I should add, so the image she must have got when she opened the door is quite amusing to think about. She opened the door almost immediately, which I found odd for it being 2 a.m., but I was thankful nonetheless. I told her what had happened, and we locked her door and started panicking. Neither of us knew what to do, as we had never been in a situation like this before. Being stupid and young, I decided to ring my mum. Completely not helpful to the situation, but I wasn't thinking straight. And she told me to ring the police immediately. So we rang the police, and because we didn't know if the men were in the house or not, they arrived within 2 minutes, as if it may have been an act of burglary. I had left my laptop and all my possessions in my room, other than my phone, because it happened to be in my hand when I ran, so if they were in my room, they would have plenty to take. The police arrived, and we threw down some keys from the top window to them so they could let themselves in. They searched the whole house top to bottom and found no one. I went down when they assured us it was safe and checked my room, and nothing had been taken. I knew for sure they mustn't have even come into my room at all, as my laptop was clear as day on my bed, and would have been the first thing that they had seen if they had. The police agreed that I must have scared them off by getting up, as they mustn't have been expecting anyone to be in. They must have thought the room was a living room, as it made sense for it to be, and have been expecting to rob the house while everyone was asleep upstairs. I had this crazy thought process through all of this, where I started wondering if I had seen what I thought I had, and started doubting myself and wondering if I was just insane. But when I went down to check my room, my window had been completely open to its fullest extent. I had opened it only a crack at most, and this just confirmed that what I had seen was completely real. I learned a valuable lesson about leaving windows open that day for sure. While the police were there, they actually got radioed about an attempted robbery just a couple of streets along from mine, and they suspected it was the same 2 men. Nothing ever came back about that though, so they mustn't have caught them, unfortunately. They told us that if they did catch anybody engaging in any similar crime, they would get back in touch, but to this day, they haven't. So either they had been caught and not connected to my case, or they haven't been caught at all. CSI came the next day and actually managed to get a fingerprint from the window, but they said the person must have been sweating or something, as the fingerprint was too smudged to get anything from. I'm so glad I decided to stay up later, as if I hadn't been awake for this, they would have physically been in my room by the time I noticed that they were there, or they noticed me. The thought of waking up to two men in my room is terrifying, and I'm not sure what they would have done if they had got into the room before realizing, as there was then no easy escape for them. They would have had to have climbed out the tiny window again, or unlock my bedroom door and then the front door to get out. This might have led to a violent and nasty situation, and if they had realized they were stuck in a room with an eyewitness, and it doesn't bear thinking about. Also, my roommate told me after the police left that she had actually woken up for some reason about 5 minutes before I came flying up the stairs, and she said she heard the loud bang on my window when she was already awake. She started to get a bad feeling after that and had waited up for a bit, sitting on the end of her bed next to the door, just in case I came running up. It's very interesting that she woke up during this, as the men were not loud at any point other than when they hit the window. Maybe that says a lot about the body's ability to detect danger. I, unfortunately, ended up not being able to sleep in that room after that without having all the lights on, and soon after decided to move back home for university because I felt so uneasy living down there. I have so many experiences that belong here. Now, this happened when I had just turned 18, about 5 years ago, so some details are hazy, but most are still extremely clear. It was my first job, just as a convenience store cashier in a pretty low-traffic plaza within walking distance from my house, and I was pretty good at working there. My managers liked me because I followed the rules due to a fear I've always had about getting in trouble. Unfortunately, my managers also did not do anything when I was harassed, which happened pretty much 3 or more times a week. Now, I was 18, but I looked about 14. I constantly got asked, and still 5 years later, if I was even old enough to be working. So when I got hit on by much, much older men, it wasn't just creepy, it was bordering on predatory behavior. A 30-year-old man charmed me into giving him my number once, and when I told him how old I was, he said, "Wow, I thought you were a lot younger." That's good. So, he thought I was younger than 18, and still wanted to date me, and the conversation ended there. At this point though, besides the weekly guys hitting on me, and at that time I was threatened by an old guy on what had to have been hardcore meth to kill me with his chicken wing bone while eating it, nothing really crazy had happened. I hoped it wouldn't because, again, no one ever did anything even when I complained. 9:57 one night before closing at 10, a younger-looking kid comes in, probably mid-20s, patchy beard that looks like when a 15-year-old tries to grow one. Looks like he still lives in mommy's basement playing video games. You know, that kind of guy. He comes in alone, gets a drink, and messes around the store until we make the announcement that we are closing in 1 minute. Then he comes up to the counter, gives me a really creepy grin, and starts chatting. From the get-go, I had this weirdly bad vibe about this dude, and my manager is in the office doing closing stuff, so I'm checking him out, but by myself. He's just being really creepy. When the register opens to give him his change, he starts chuckling and saying, "Wow, that's a lot. Wow, can I have some?" And leaning over the counter. I actually thought he was going to rob me, but I'm a nervous person with anxiety, so I was stammering and laughing nervously and pretending it was normal, and he leans even closer and says, "You just want to go home, don't you? You just want to go home, right? You really just want to go home." and the creepiest voice that I imagine a kidnapper would use to taunt his victim. That's literally what it sounded like. It was terrifying. Then he leaves and we close. I was scared to drive home and felt like I was being followed or watched. I don't see him for a few days, and then he comes in again pretty close to closing time with his girlfriend, who later I realize always had this weird look on her face, like maybe deep inside she didn't want to be there or around him, but was still affectionate to him and all that. So I said, oh, thank God, maybe he won't be creepy to me. And sure, that time it was a little bit better. He was still incredibly weird, but she was nice and it was easier to talk. Then there was a third time about a week or so later. He came in with the girlfriend again, but she walked out as he came to pay. Again, it was close to closing and there was really no one there. Again, a manager wasn't around, and this is the part that isn't hazy at all because it was just so creepy, and the conversation went like this. So I talked to my girlfriend. She likes you. If you wanted to, get together with us, she'd be down. After staring at him for about 15 seconds straight. What? Him, smiling creepily. Yeah, would you be down? I literally can't believe this is happening at this point. I'm like nervously laughing and shaking my head and saying, no thank you. Thanks, no. And then he gets all close and looks me dead in the eye with this smile and lowers his voice and says, you could be my girl, just like her. How does that sound? You could be so happy with us, with me. You could quit this job. You won't have to work at all. I pay the rent, for her clothes, everything. Anything she wants, I get. Anything you want, I'd get you too. What about that, It'll be so good. And as he's saying this, he keeps leaning further over the counter, and I just said, no. Then he grabbed his stuff, because during all of this I had been awkwardly checking out his stuff, and winks at me and says, if you ever change your mind, and walks out. And then next time I see him come in as I'm checking out another guy, and I mutter something along the lines of, oh God, this guy again. Turns out I was checking out his brother, and apparently they were also with their mother, who proceeds to tell this creep I said that about him, and creep comes up and all, of course, creepily says, do you not like me? I heard he didn't want to talk to me. Hurt my feelings. Why are you saying that stuff about me? And I was just nervously brushing it off and didn't know what to do. And then he left, and I never saw him or his girlfriend again. My manager didn't do anything, just laughed about it and said, what? What the heck? And went about her business. Only one newer supervisor said that was unacceptable, and she would tell him to leave if he ever came in again. But, thankfully, he didn't. Growing up in a Boston suburb during the 80s was rough. I came up in a neighborhood that was rife with shady activity. It was the kind of place that changed when the sun went down. Sketchy streets and arterial alleyways that looked sinister when shrouded in darkness. My dad was an introverted workaholic, and the subsequent loneliness driving my mom to the bottle. I was rebellious, angry, and without income. It was the perfect storm. Naturally, I fell into petty crime. School was a joke, a glorified daycare for hopeless kids with no future in anything but prison or the morgue. We were extremely disrespectful to the faculty. On more than one occasion, a member of the teaching staff was assaulted by a student, but there was one teacher who seemed to be an exception. He was someone who the kids never talked back to, someone who had that natural air of authority about him. His name was Mr. Metzger. A few teachers at our school were a mess. Fresh college graduates who were only maybe a year older than the kids in our class. A couple of functioning alcoholics who smelled like vodka at 8:30 each morning. Shirt buttons undone with loose, tacky Walmart ties complete with 5-day stubble. But not Mr. Metzger. He was always clean-shaven, his thinning gray hair combed over a bald patch on the crown of his head. He commanded respect. One Friday evening, my buddies and I were smoking cigarettes, cruising in a battered old Ford when the subject of Mr. Metzger came up. "You know he's a war veteran, right? Dude was a Marine or some crap, got a Silver Star for killing like 10 enemy soldiers in an ambush or something," one said. "I call BS," the other retorted. "Not everyone who served was some stone-cold killer. My uncle was in the Army motor pool, said he never fired a shot." "Nah, man. Metzger's hardcore. I heard he broke a kid's jaw breaking up a fight a few years back." "That kid's jaw was already broken, and if Mr. Metzger was in the Marines, he certainly never talked about it." Later that night, we pulled up to a small stucco house on the outskirts of Jamaica Plain. It was pretty unassuming, not the usual middle-class housing we targeted for burglaries, but my buddy in the back seat insisted. "You sure this is the right place?" "Dude, for the last time, yes. The guy buys and sells auto parts. There's always a buttload of cash stashed inside, I'm telling you. This will be a huge score for us." We parked around the block, scanning the area before we approached the house. Pulling out bandanas and balaclavas, we used them to obscure our faces from any potential witnesses. It was quiet out, almost pitch black if it wasn't for the dim fluorescent glow of orange street lamps. Breaking into the garage was easy. The rotting wood of a side door gave way from around the old rusty lock, and just like that, we were inside. But the interior of the damp, dark garage held no car parts, no sign of any mechanical work at all. I shot our insistent friend a scornful look. We should have just left right then and there, but we were young, foolish, and arrogant. We didn't want to walk away empty-handed. At the door to the main house, we listened for any sign of activity inside, and it was silent. I gulped, took hold of the door handle, and pulled. A short corridor led to a side room which was evidently serving as a kind of office space, with books and paperwork piled on an old desk. I crept inside while my buddies searched the rest of the ground floor for valuables. It was searching the office that I began to notice a few things about the person who lived here. Despite being time-worn and dilapidated, the room was incredibly orderly and neat. The contents of shelves were immaculately arranged, with one wall displaying a ragged-looking flag, red and blue with a yellow star in the center. I had no idea what country it was from, but I did get a feeling I'd seen it before somewhere. A section of wall was decorated with framed newspaper clippings. They were almost impossible to read in the darkness, but a shaft of pale moonlight creeping in through a grimy window drew my eye to one word in particular: Vietnam. Our late-night burglaries were always heart-pounding affairs, but an unfamiliar terror began to claw at my guts as I quietly slid open one of the desk drawers. There, sat next to the dull metal of a Colt 45, was some kind of necklace. Bumpy, wrinkled shapes, haphazardly strung together with a piece of cord. I squinted in the darkness, reaching inside to run a fingertip along one of the furrowed clumps. They felt textured, desiccated. I had a solid lump of fear in my throat, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end by the time I realized what they were. They were human ears. I started to back out of the room, feeling the raw, palm-sweating terror coursing through me as my mind began to race. We need to get out of here. We need to get out of here right now. I could hear the creak of old floorboards growing closer to me by the time I saw something rush past the window. I stopped, peering into the street outside in time to see another shape, hurtling past the grubby pane of glass at full sprint. It was my buddies. I was alone with whoever was creeping up on me in the corridor behind. I turned in time to see him, standing in the threshold blocking my escape. I'll never forget the sound of the rhythmic inhale and exhale of air through his nostrils. The breaths sounded ragged, almost shaky, relaying the absolute fury and contempt that the figure felt for me. He stepped forward, his face momentarily bathed in the dim moonlight, features that were twisted by wrath, pale blue eyes that seethed with a predatory glare. It was Mr. Metzger. He lunged. I was fast, but he was faster, stronger, and possibly so. We struggled, grunting and growling as his rough, callous hands tried to wrap themselves around my neck. It was a practiced maneuver. It seemed instinctual to him. To my absolute horror, the black bandana that disguised me began to loosen, slipping down a little as we fought. If he sees my face, I'm dead. Blind panic set in. I threw myself forward, my forehead smashing into one of his eye sockets. His grip loosened. I thrashed and kicked as he cried out in pain, freeing myself just enough to be able to pull myself away from him and make a dash for the garage. I burst out of the house, tearing down the street as fast as my legs could carry me. Any second now he's going to aim that Colt 45 and blow my head off. I couldn't bring myself to look back. I didn't want to see him fire the shot that would end me. Dude was a Marine, killed 10 people. I'm going to be the 11th. Oh God, help me, I'm going to be the 11th. But the shot never came. Somehow I managed to reach the end of the street, ducking into one of the garbage-strewn alleys that meandered through the neighborhood like rat runs. I almost punched my cowardly friends when I finally caught up with them. They left me alone with that maniac, left me alone to die. Are you kidding me? You saw what was inside that house. We got out at the moment we saw what was in there, one said, attempting to defend himself. You could have warned me, man. You just up and left me there alone. That thing in the TV room, it was made of hair, human hair. My other buddy finally spoke up. His cigarette burned until the hanging ash seemed to defy gravity. Shut up, that was not human hair. We don't know what it was. Then tell him about the other thing, dude. Go ahead, tell him. My other buddies sounded almost distraught at this point. I don't want to talk about that. It almost sounded childlike, his cynicism and bravado stripped away. They never did talk about what they saw. The botched burglary was never mentioned again. I dropped out of high school shortly after, following my buddies deeper into a life of criminality until an arrest for grand theft got me 6 months in prison. After my release, I turned my life around. I got a job, earned my GED, and attended a local community college to study home improvement. I led a quiet life now. I'm a father and a husband. I eat my wife's cooking, I watch the Red Sox, I go to bed at 11. I'm a different person now. But just last week in the Home Depot over near Southie, I thought I recognized an elderly man shuffling among the aisles. I followed curiously for a minute or two, keeping my distance until the man turned and locked eyes with me. I know you," he said, unsmiling. "You're one of my old high school students." Yeah, JB High, class 86. You taught history, right?" I felt that old familiar dread permeating my guts. "That's right," he said, his cold blue eyes studying me intently. "You look like you landed on your feet. Not bad for a dropout." "Yeah, I got myself together in the end. Teenagers, right?" I forced a weak smile. "Right." A solemn look on his face as his tone dropped a little. "Everyone deserves a second chance, even if they did bad things in their youth." There was a weight behind his words. My palms grew damp against the plastic push bar of the cart. "Well, nice seeing you again, Mr. Metzger. I'm kind of amazed you even recognized me," I said, beginning to wheel my cart away, trying to hide my anxiety. "Oh," he replied, an almost wolfish grin on his withered old face as I saw the same predatory glare in his eyes that I did 30 years ago. "I never forget a face." The education system here in the UK is a little different than the US. You see, we don't have a middle school. We don't have that kind of social buffer that separates children from young adults, so when you're 11 years old, you're suddenly dropped into a campus that includes larger, intimidating teenagers. As bad as it sounds, leaving the nurturing environment of primary school and entering the unforgiving, hormone-saturated world of secondary school is daunting to say the least. Granted, I was quite a shy child, but seeing all these spotty-faced, deep-voiced, hairy miscreants dragging their knuckles through the corridors, it was terrifying. They were like monsters. I didn't understand the things they did, nor the things they said. I remember just trying to keep my head down, try not to get noticed by any potential bullies. And so, that's where this story begins. With myself as a frightened, quiet boy in a place that made me dread having to wake up in the morning, homework, being popular, avoiding trouble, I thought that was as bad as it was going to get for me. I was wrong. The headmaster of the school was named Dr. Sylvester. He wasn't a medical doctor. He had earned the title in some lesser field, but he went by doctor nonetheless. He struck me as a cold man. His welcoming speech to the year 7s made secondary school seem like an ordeal we had to endure than an experience that would enrich us. The speech was emotionless, with subordinate teachers lining the old school hall like prison camp guards. The man was somewhat of a mystery to me, but then everything at the tender age of 11 is mystery. Every little aspect of life threatens and frightens. I remember feeling an immense pressure at the time. Pressure to succeed, pressure to conform. I was told not to question things, that adults always had our best interests at heart. If only that were true. I recall it being a brisk autumn morning. Leafless, skeletal trees and piles of rotting leaf litter lined the pavements. We had French class at first period, by far the most loathed of the subjects I took. Not because I disliked the language. I was actually pretty good at it. The problem was the woman who taught the class. At the time, I had the notion that she simply disliked me, that I had offended her in some way that it was in my interest to correct. But in retrospect, it was clear she hated her job. The dreadful scenario of having broken free from an institution like school only to find herself right back in one, trapped. I understand why she was so contemptuous. Maybe she had a dream once, something she longed for only to find that it was late, that she was too busy. Just another one of life's little tragedies. During the middle of the period, as I watched the hands of the classroom clock moving painfully slowly, the dull silence of the room was interrupted by a shrill, piercing sound. It was the fire bell. Some of the children jumped, nervously whispering to each other as they awaited the instruction of the teacher. "Fire drill." The French teacher's voice was a flat drone. "Everybody line up outside the building." There was a touch of excitement in the air by then. The fire drill broke up the monotony of the long, boring school day. We gathered our belongings, filing out of the classroom as the teacher to the monotone murmur of single file. As you can imagine, other classes were also doing the same, so before long, there was quite a number of children, all walking down one long, locker-lined corridor. I had been in fire drills before, obviously, so I was no stranger to the actual drill. But there was something different about this one. Something which wafted through the corridors towards and washed over the already nervous children. We could smell smoke. Something was actually burning. The most terrifying memory of the event wasn't the fire itself. It wasn't the ominous smell of burning plastic or the cries of frightened students who were beginning to panic. It was the look on the presiding teachers' faces when they realized the very real danger we were in. At that age, adults seemed invincible, like they can solve every problem and then some. I had never in my short life seen a look of terror so pure on a grown-up's face. It chilled me to the bone. With anxious voices, the teachers herded us to the nearest exit. The intensity of the smoke increases as we moved. Pouring out of the building, we could see the far wing of the school building as it burned, wildfires dancing among thick black smoke. Then the screams began. Children turned in the direction of the building's burning section, pointing and screeching as a figure emerged from the conflagration. It was engulfed in flame, a walking inferno whose cries of pains were burned up before they could leave charred lips. Then there were sirens, flashing blue lights, and men that wore fluorescent uniforms. Paramedics tried to stifle the blaze on the burning man. The sight of his charred, smoking corpse had children in tears as teachers barked at them to look away. But looking away didn't help. Even when I closed my eyes and put my fingers in my ears, I could still smell it. I could still smell the burning flesh. The school actually closed down for a week while the damage could be assessed. Local authorities offered to pay for trauma counseling for the entire teaching staff and student body. Our class, along with our respective parents, attended a group session at a nearby community center. I didn't understand any of it. I didn't understand why we would want to all sit around and talk about something so terrible, why we all weren't just at home trying to be happy, trying to forget. It's terrible to say so, but I considered the time off as a sort of special holiday. I was allowed to play video games for as long as I wanted. My parents even bought me a new game. I could tell they thought I was upset, that they were trying to be good parents. I just didn't question any of it. Like I said, I just thought it was better to try to forget. Why would I want to remember the sight of that burning man climbing from the debris? Why would anyone want to remember that? After a few days, the school sent a letter out to all the families involved. The cause of the fire was said to be an electrical fault, a freak surge that shorted a kitchen power outlet and set fire to a broken refrigerator. However, I did notice something about my parents around that time. When I was out of the room, I would hear them talking in hushed tones. They were discussing something they didn't want me to hear, something secret. I was a curious kid, sure, but I had no desire to eavesdrop. I was acutely aware that there were things in the world I really didn't want to know about. Some things are better left as secrets. It took 10 years for the truth to come out. One evening, whilst sitting down for a home-cooked family meal, we started to discuss my school days. It was nothing in particular at first, but somehow the subject of the fire came up. Just a passing comment, nothing shocking or abrasive, yet my parents reacted rather strangely. My dad put down his cutlery and cleared his throat, giving my mom a long, serious look. She did the same, sighing before she turned to me and spoke. "Alex, you remember that fire at your school, right?" I nodded. Of course I did. The school held a service for the burned janitor when he passed over from his injuries. "Well, we didn't tell you the truth back then about the fire. We're sorry. We hope you understand that we did what we thought was best at the time." I stayed silent, my eyes darting between my parents, simply waiting for whatever it was they had to say. "The thing is, son," my dad took over, taking my mom's hand in his and giving it a loving squeeze. "That fire was no accident. Someone set fire to the school, tried to burn it down. With all the children inside," Mom interjected. She brought her hand to her mouth and her voice began to crack, fresh tears twinkling in the corner of her eyes. My dad just hushed her, comforting her softly before he continued. "You see, Mr. Sylvester, the head teacher, that wasn't his name at all. Before then, he had never held a teaching position in his life. His name was Bernard Lee. Bernard Lee began an affair with a woman and wanted to escape his family. He wanted a new life. He wanted a clean slate. So one night, while his wife and children were sleeping, he doused their home in petrol and set it ablaze." My mom was sobbing at this point, tears rolling down her cheeks, but she still managed a few final words. "But unlike you, son, who were so lucky to have, those children never escaped. They never escaped." We all broke down at this point, embracing as a family, counting our blessings that my class was able to escape from a similar fate as those poor, unwanted children of Bernard Lee. Later on in life, shortly before I actually decided to commit this piece of memory to paper, I thought back to that time in my life when I was young and frightened, when everything was so big and scary, when the vast possibility of life terrified instead of inspired, when I thought I was walking among monsters. How could I have possibly known back then? that I was right. It's been a long time since I graduated high school. So long that it feels as if it's all an event that occurred in another person's life. It feels like something that I read about or imagined, something illusory that I've inserted myself into. They say the human body replaces all its living cells every 7 years, so I suppose that physically I am a different person than the one that existed a decade ago. But the final conversation I had with an old history teacher, Mr. Cole, is one that feels like it occurred just yesterday. For almost 15 years, I had replayed the interaction in my mind over and over again. It's something I don't think I'll ever forget. He was standing out of sight from the main crowd, around a corner of the main school building. He wore his sandy brown hair in a rough ponytail, facial hair raggedly fashioned into a handlebar mustache. A cigarette burned between his fingers, adding to the brown nicotine stains that colored the tips. Something struck me about the way he looked at me as I took out my own pack of smokes and asked him for a light. He didn't see me as a student anymore. There was a coldness in his gaze. Something else, too, a kind of pity or disgust in his eyes. Half of me expected him to scold me for feeding such a filthy habit, but he didn't. He didn't say a word as he reached into the pocket of his worn, faded jeans and pulled out an old Zippo. We talked about growing up, about how I was ready to go out into the world and find myself as a person. I asked him how long it took for him to do the same. "I used to think about it a lot," he said, looking off into the near distance. "But you reach a certain age and you know who you are. I live in a little condo near a bar, just on the edge of town, work 9 to 5, then in between I drink. And there ain't nobody there to stop me. I know who I am, and after all these years, there's a kind of victory in that." I'd never heard him talk this way before, never in this tone. He wasn't the Mr. Cole that kept his history class gripped with tales of yore, passionate speeches about life and liberty that had him greatly respected around campus. He seemed defeated. He seemed broken. Mr. Cole wore a wedding band, but it occurred to me that he never mentioned anything about a family. I chose not to ask. We talked about what I had learned at my time attending the school. He listened, he nodded, but I got the impression he was uninterested, somehow unimpressed. This irritated me a little. Sure, my answer was full of cliches and platitudes, but to dismiss my experience in just a glance grated against me. I asked him what he had learned in his time teaching there. Some days, I wish I didn't ask. "Some people in this town act like they're not even aware that the outside world exists. They might as well be living in a cave. This place is a gutter, one giant trailer park just floating through the universe, somehow apart from it. But that doesn't mean they can't be happy. It doesn't mean they don't have value. I mean, there's no shame in being consciously happy while being unconsciously ignorant." "That's just it, kid. They're consciously ignorant," he replied, crushing the burned-up remnants of his cigarette under his boot before lighting up another. "I think human consciousness is a tragic mistake in the history of our evolution." He let the thought sink in, and he took in a lungful of smoke, exhaling lazily as his gaze remained pinned to the distant horizon. "We became too sentient, too self-aware. Whatever drives the universe forced the creation of an element's separation from itself. We humans are creatures that have no right to exist by natural law. We are things that operate under the false pretenses of having a self, this chaotic mess of senses and feelings, all somehow totally assured that we are each somebody, when in fact, we're all just nobody." "So, I'm guessing you're not a religious man," I said, feeling rather accomplished as he chuckled at my response. "Religion? Man, now there's a thing." There was a faint smile on his face, as if the very thought of it amused him. A transfer of fear and self-loathing to a figure of divine authority. I can understand the catharsis. God soaks up their doubt and pain with his perfect Star Wars narrative. I don't know, sir. Sounds like you could do with a little old-time religion. I replied, finishing my own cigarette, but not hearty enough to immediately begin another, unlike Mr. Cole. If it's good enough for Grandma, right? He smiled again. At least I'm not rushing towards a cosmic stop sign. It was about this time that I confessed to Mr. Cole that I was shocked to hear him talk this way, that nothing about his classes indicated he had such a pessimistic worldview. I was building up to the question, but he gave me a look which said that he knew well what I was about to ask. You want to know what made me this way, right? He asked with that same faint smile on his withered lips. A lot of people want to know that. I mostly tell him to buzz off, but you... He cut himself for a moment, shaking his head with that look of pity and disgust in his eyes. My wife, God rest her soul. She and I, well, we lost our daughter when she was real young. All the emotion seemed to drain out of him while he spoke. He was clinical in his confession. I think about her every so often, my daughter, and what she was spared. During the better moments, I feel sort of grateful for it. Doctor said she didn't feel a thing, that the drunk driver sent her straight into a coma. And after a few weeks of sleepless, tear-stained nights, somewhere in that dark room she was locked in, she slipped off into another, deeper kind of sleep. I'm sorry. It was all I could think to say. He heard my voice quiver with sadness. Nah, don't be. It's a beautiful way to go out. Painless, happy, innocent. Trouble with dying later is that it's too late. The damage is done. He had an odd way of reassuring me. You want kids? He asked. I shrugged. I had never really given it any thought. Don't, he responded, almost contemptuously. I think of how arrogant and cruel it is to force a soul out from the ether into this sack of rotting flesh, to condemn a life to walk blindly in this meat grinder. Sometimes I think I should go thank that drunk for getting behind the wheel after one too many. They spared me the sin of being a father. I confided in him that I believed there was more to life than just soul-crushing pain and grinding worthlessness. That now, more than ever, people can act in ways that can change the world for the better. He disagreed. You see, this is what I'm talking about, he said, evidently growing a little frustrated as he threw down his second cigarette and repeated the action of stamping it out. Sure, there are broader ideas in play, mainly what is shared between us as a species for our mutual illusions. Ever seen a dead body? He asked me. I nodded slowly. Then you'll know. You look in their eyes. Even in a picture, you can still read them. You know what I see? I see that they welcomed it when it finally came. Not at first, but right there in the final moment. It's relief. They were afraid, and now they see for the very first time how easy it was to just let it all go. In those last few seconds of life, they saw what they were, what they had always been. You, me, them, this whole comic tragedy was never more than thrown together presumptions and stupid blind will. And what you need to do is just let go. To finally know that you didn't have to hold on so tight. To realize that all your life, all your love, all your hate, all your memories, all your heartache, it was all just the same thing. It was all the same dream. A dream that you had inside a locked room. A dream about being a person. Mr. Cole started to walk away, the keys to his truck jangling as he pulled them from his pocket. "Good luck, kid. You're gonna need it." I moved out of town, out to a coastal city where the people aren't like those stuck in small Arizona towns. Sometimes I think Mr. Cole was wrong, that there's a brighter side to existence that he neglected to touch upon. But sometimes, in darker moments, as I'm lying in bed after long days spent working in a cramped, sterile office space, Mr. Cole's words run through my mind. They bounce off the walls of my skull, refusing to relinquish my fears, feeding on my doubts. It's in those moments that I know Mr. Cole was right. Mr. Schwenko was the toughest teacher in our high school. He was a 6-foot-something bear of a man who marched around campus with a look on his face that even the most unruly of students found daunting. Having emigrated from Eastern Europe after the collapse of the old Soviet Union, he spoke with a heavy accent, but his English was perfect. He taught physics in an emotionless, sterile manner. On his bad days, his tone of his voice could be described as a bark. One day, during an unusually interesting class, Mr. Schwenko was going over the different types of radiation that existed. A studious pupil in the front row raised a hand to ask him how he knew so much about the subject. "I did some work for a power plant on my home country," he replied dryly, turning to the chalkboard and beginning a crudely drawn diagram. One of the jocks, who was known for being somewhat of a bully, made a comment about how it was probably the one that blew up. Mr. Shevchenko's chalk stick snapped. The hand that gripped the broken piece trembled as he lowered it to his side. With an audible sigh, the teacher turned back around, his eyes fixed on the disrespectful bully. "Have you ever seen your friends die?" Mr. Schwenko asked softly. It was the first time any of us had ever heard him talk in a way that didn't make us flinch. But somehow, his tone was even more frightening than before. The jock didn't respond. "I asked you a question, boy." The jock remained silent. His cheeks turned a shade of crimson as Mr. Schwenko's beady brown eyes bore into him. With the same flat facial expression, the furious teacher walked towards the classroom's door. The room shifted as he locked it. "New lesson today. Close your books."
Mr. Schwenko, sir?"
A nervous-looking girl in glasses raised her hand. She was unable to hide the raw fear in her voice.
"I don't feel
Shut up, girl. You thank the boy with the big mouth later. This is a collective punishment." Mr. Schwenko hissed, taking a seat at his desk. We waited, the tension thick in the air as we dreaded to think what Mr. Schwenko had in store for us. We'd never seen him as angry as he was now. Some people even said they'd smelled alcohol in his breath some days. I felt a knot of fear in my guts as I pictured the morbid newspaper headlines that might follow the next day. "The most important time of life happened before any of you were even born," Mr. Schwenko began. "It was the 25th of April, 1986, the day the entire world ended for my town. I had recently returned from Moscow after studying nuclear physics at the university there. I was glad to be home. It was the start of a new life for me. I had a girlfriend. I hoped to marry once I found work. Pripyat was a beautiful place. Forests nearby, streams for fishing. We were happy there. That evening was warm with a clear, cloudless sky. Above Pripyat was a ceiling of stars, a blanket of celestial bodies that you could lose yourself in for hours. But that same night, an accident that occurred near our town changed my life forever. An accident that occurred at... I knew what he was going to say before he said it. The words were on my lips before he even uttered them. The Chernobyl nuclear power plant. There was a saying in my homeland, "We pretend to work and the government pretends to pay us." The class could see the sadness in our teacher's eyes as he spoke. It was like that back then. Communism had destroyed people's desire to better themselves. Years of incompetence and corruption meant that there was a design flaw in one of the new reactors. When the safety test began, the reactor was like a loaded gun, just waiting to go off. So when the control rods were removed to raise power again, he calmly looked over to the disrespectful jock, narrowing his eyes as he leaned into his desk. Boom! Mr. Schwenko's roar sent the jock reeling in his seat. The rest of our class didn't fare too well either. We were gripped, hanging on to our teacher's every word. But what no one knew, thanks to years of error and cover-up, was that there was a fatal flaw in the reactor design that made it unstable at low power levels. As power levels were lowered in preparation for the test, they dropped too low, and the reactor ground to a halt. Meanwhile, unseen, a dangerous hotspot was building deep in the reactor. 2 huge explosions that shook the earth beneath our feet. Every man, woman, and child in Pripyat heard the bangs. But we had no idea what it was. Some of the off-duty workers feared the worst, but none of us could have fathomed that what was about to unfold was the worst nuclear disaster in history. I felt the shockwave as I looked towards at the power station. A pillar of smoke rose up in the clear night sky, and though the inky blackness of the night, I made out twinkles of flame in the distance. Some of the people in my apartment block thought war had broken out. Then myself and the people of Pripyat watched in awe and terror as the huge stream of ionizing radiation shot into the heavens, lighting up the night with a hideous blue glow. We thought the world was ending. For us, it certainly was. People were terrified beyond belief, but I must admit, I found myself smiling as I looked out into the night. It was titanic, like looking at the face of God, a gargantuan mass of pure energy. It was beautiful. The melancholic look never left Mr. Schwenko's eyes, even if a small, nostalgic grin did curl his lips. But that was only the start of it. What came after, both as a result of the accident and of the government's mishandling of it, was much more horrific. The teacher never took his eyes off the jock, as if every single word was directed at him. It must have been torturous. It certainly was for the rest of us. We were forced to listen, and we had no escape. Did you know that they bust a troupe of entertainers to keep some of the nearer villagers calm as they died of radiation poisoning? Let me describe to you one such performance. Mr. Schwenko began, relishing the disturbed looks on our faces. A beautiful ballerina, dancing her final dance. Strands of her blonde hair floated to the floor as she twirled. I saw blood leaking from her nostrils, down her cheeks as it seeped from her ears. When she finished, the children ran to her with flowers, their hair and teeth already starting to fall out. The generator stalled, and for several months we were plunged into darkness. To my complete and utter horror, I saw the flowers and the children glowing in the dark. There were a few gasps around the room. One of the girls in the back row was sobbing quietly into a sleeve of her sweater. The cleanup involved the work of 30,000 people, continued the teacher. There are less people in this town. Think of that. 30,000 people. They called them liquidators, a disgusting euphemism coined by a man too cowardly to call them what they were, the condemned. Do you know what it's like, boy? Have you had to look a friend in the eye and tell him to walk towards his own painful death? Schwenko growled towards the jock. You looked at me like you would have no problem, as long as it would have saved your own skin. 4 million people suffer today from something that happened 30 years ago. 4 million. He stood up, walking slowly towards the desk that sat the now terrified jock. And you think this is funny, yes? The jock shook his head violently, still too terrified to speak. His eyes begged for mercy. Yes, you laughed. You think that seeing children being burned from the inside out, dying the most painful death imaginable, never knowing why or how they were being murdered by something they couldn't even see. You think this is a joke, don't you? No, sir. Mr. Schwenko towered over the boy's desk, eyes wide and full of fury. We waited for him to snap, for him to beat the life out of this kid, but he just turned, walked towards the door, and unlocked it. Class dismissed, he murmured, sinking back into his seat. I've never seen a classroom of kids move so quickly in my life. Not even on the last day of school did we tear out of the building like that. But on the way out, I slowed, stopping near Mr. Schwenko's desk and feeling the anxiety build. Mr. Schwenko? He looked up at me, that same sadness filling his eyes as I spoke. I'm sorry. He just nodded, and without another word, I departed. I went to a good high school, one nestled in a leafy green suburb. It was selective, exclusive, and we rarely had any trouble among the students. The PTA's idea of drama was if two moms brought the same cake to a bake sale. Scandal just wasn't a word in our lexicon. But I do remember one event that caused shockwaves among the parents and teachers, one that had terrified parents up in arms about how such a strange and worrying occurrence was even allowed to unfold. Good morning, class. A strange silence fell over the classroom. The man who'd just walked in the room wasn't our regular teacher. In fact, none of us had ever laid eyes on him in our lives. You can call me Mr. Witzbold. I am to be your substitute teacher for the next 2 hours. Mr. Witzbold said, writing his name in big block capitals on the chalkboard. He was well-groomed, but there was something off about him, like he possessed only an appearance of dapperness, like there was something deeply wrong below the surface. Today we'll be studying a little biology, perhaps the most fascinating of all the sciences. Mr. Witzbold, sir? A studious-looking boy in the front row raised his hand. This is English class, shouldn't we? The boy cut himself off, lowering his hand nervously as the teacher stared unblinkingly at him. He didn't say a word, but we all felt the weight of that stare crush the talkative young student. As I was saying, the teacher continued, today we'll be studying biology, and I promise not a single one of you will find today's lesson boring. The respiratory system is perhaps one of the most complex the body possesses. Mr. Witzbold began, drawing a rough diagram of some lungs on the chalkboard. Its function is to transfer extraneous oxygen to the body's cells via hemoglobin in the blood. Can any student tell me how long the body can survive without oxygen? The substitute teacher turned and faced the class now, the smile on his face somehow too wide. We shifted silently in our seats. 3 minutes, continued Mr. Witzbold. It takes just 3 minutes for the body to experience what is known as hypoxia. Should oxygen delivery to cells become insufficient over a prolonged period of time, the subject's brain shuts down into a comatose state in order to preserve oxygen. If a ready supply is not returned, well, complete cell shutdown occurs. However, time until expirations is even less in the vacuum of space. Back in 1971, the Soviet cosmonauts died when a system's fault caused their spacecraft to depressurize, shortly before re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere. The crew died within 30 to 40 seconds, as air pressure is required to deliver oxygen to the brain. Isn't that fascinating? It wasn't the morbidly academic descriptions that disturbed us. It was Mr. Witzbold's delivery. He seemed fascinated by such morose information, like it gave him great joy to educate us on it. I find the human body to be enthralling, you see. The thin, sickly-looking teacher wandered back and forth before the class as he spoke. So durable, it's so fragile. Our spirits can leave an indelible mark upon the world, yet our bodies are mere shadows and dust. For example, mankind has mastered every terrain planet Earth has to offer. Take the hardy Bedouin of the Arabian deserts, or the resilient Eskimo of the Arctic Circle. Yet can anyone here tell me how much body temperature is required to drop before ill effects are felt? Again, the class was silent. Some fidgeted nervously in their seats, feeling the tension hanging in the air as Mr. Witsbold stalked the rows of desks. Just 2 degrees. If core temperatures falls by a trivial 2 degrees, hypothermia begins to set in. Low temperatures change the speed of different chemical reactions that the body needs to continue functioning. Slowing them throws delicate systems out of balance. The person will start to lose consciousness. The heart will then lose its rhythm. Cessation of vital signs follows at about 24 degrees when the heart stops. The mousy girl who sat in front of me visibly shuddered. A similar minuscule rise in body temperature can also be catastrophic to a person's health. At temperatures higher than 41.5 degrees, a person may begin to suffer from convulsions. Irreversible brain damage can occur at temperatures above 42.5 degrees. The blood thickens and slows. The kidneys stop working. The heart muscle can be damaged and skeletal muscles start breaking down. Essentially, this is what we call and describe as a multi-organ failure, but more specifically, it's when the brain begins to cook. You, stand. Mr. Witsbold pointed towards the shy, mousy girl sitting in front of me. She sat up in her chair, horrified that she was being selected for anything by such an eerie individual. Mr. Witsbold slid the chair from behind the teacher's desk and placed it at the head of the class. Sit, he commanded, his tone still warm and friendly, his smile still far too wide. Slowly, the shy girl rose from her seat, treading carefully up the aisle of desks with a terrified look in her eyes. She was practically catatonic by the time she sat down in the teacher's chair, beyond mortified. Now, despite being so incredibly fragile, the human body is, in many ways, immensely durable. Mr. Witsbold was standing behind the shy girl now, standing perhaps just a little too close. For example, if I were to take a large, sharpened implement and remove this promising young woman's head, the nervous system would actually continue to function, if only for a short while. Electrical energy trapped between synapses might well cause her decapitated body to stand and take a few panicked steps before crumpling, while the eyes continue to send images to the visual cortex. In all likelihood, she would be able to watch the entire fascinating performance unfold. Isn't that something? The shy, mousy girl, hoping that Mr. Witsbold's macabre demonstration was over, began to rise from the teacher's desk. To her absolute horror, she found his hands on her shoulders, forcing her back down into the chair. "Where do you think you're going, my dear?" he asked with a wolfish grin. "I'm not done with you yet." Now, those of you that think decapitation to be a particularly grim form of demise, I must inform you that you're sadly mistaken. There are many, many worse ways to expire. Mr. Witsbold kept his hands on the shy girl's shoulders. Scaphism, sometimes known as the boats, was a method of execution designed by the ancient Persians to cause as much suffering as possible before death. He began. The class was on tenterhooks now, hanging on to his every word. The only accurate descriptions that we have are from the Persians' oldest rivals and mortal enemies, the Greeks. The victim would be trapped inside a bath or hollowed-out tree trunk with just their head, hands, and feet protruding. The subject would be force-fed milk and honey to the point at which they developed horrendous diarrhea. At this point, more milk and honey would be poured all over them, particularly the hands and face. The class was utterly dumbstruck, unable to quite believe what they were hearing. The idea was that as the boats filled with the aforementioned milk and honey, biting and burrowing insects would overwhelm the subject, inflicting a horrendous kind of torture. The swarm would simply drive the victim mad as this combined with whatever injuries were inflicted. The torture was dragged out for as long as possible, but death would eventually come as a result of dehydration, starvation, exhaustion, and septic shock. Just as Mr. Witsbold was launching into another horrific description of expiration, the period bell sounded. At first, some of the class was too scared to move. We normally rushed out of the room as soon as the period was over, but this was different. We were rendered almost immobile by the torturous words of the substitute teacher. Complaints were made, and an inquiry was held. Parents wanted to know just how such a man could slip through the system. Some took their children out of the school, citing trauma and stress disorders brought on from the experience. I know I never, ever saw the shy, mousy girl at school again. As a matter of fact, I never saw or heard of Mr. Witsbold again. But that's something I find myself thanking God for every single day. Scotland is an old and wild place. It's there that the unstoppable expansion of the mighty Roman Empire was halted firmly in its tracks. Legionnaire veterans, hardened by years of armed conflict on the savage fringes of the Imperium, were turned back once they reached the land that they called Caledonia. It had always been somewhat of a mystery to my high school history teacher as to why such a powerful, organized force stopped in its tracks. Some scholars note the lack of natural resources, explaining that the Empire had nothing to gain from conquering Scotland. But thick, ancient forests would have yielded millions of tons of lumber to fuel the Empire's war machine, not to mention the abundant red iron ore buried in Scotland's vast rolling hills. Regardless, Mr. Lennon believed that the answer to the age-old question actually did reside in the land's seemingly infinite, impenetrable forests. For there is something that exists in the dark, damp woodlands of old Caledonia, something that was once worshipped before it slipped into rumor and legend, something that was here long before humanity and will be here long after we're gone. We were excited when Mr. Lennon informed us that our class would be eligible for the week-long field trip to Edinburgh. In hindsight, maybe we shouldn't have been. As Americans abroad, we were often objects of curiosity, viewed as practically exotic by many of the local populace. Two of my buddies and I formed a kind of homesick Americans club who saw themselves as a trio of marauders from the old colonies, pillaging the lands of their ancestors. "It'll do us a world of good to take a break from city living," Mr. Lennon said with a wide smile, stepping off onto the railway platform of a small Scottish town. "Some of you kids are unaware that there's a world outside of your cell phones." We were headed for a place known as Maybe Forest, a few 100 square miles of lakes, hills, and woodland with only a handful of trails to divide it up. It was a chill October morning as our group of 20 or so students made the short hike out of town, paying no mind to the locals who eyed us suspiciously from grubby window panes. Not even a half hour had passed, but already I was regretting having packed so much in my backpack. The straps dug into my shoulders so hard it felt like they were cutting off circulation. I had to rest my thumbs under them just to keep the ache at bay. Naturally, it was a great relief when Mr. Lennon called a 5-minute break. I had never been so relieved to be off my feet. The autumn sun was in afternoon decline as we continued to trudge along the narrow country lanes. The strain of lugging my heavy pack had beads of sweat forming on my brow, a dull ache now present in my shoulders and feet. It had been hours since we'd seen any cars or people, and it was beginning to show in our environment. Foliage at the sides of the road grew progressively untamed, dry stone walls crumbling as twisting vines began to reclaim what was once mankind's. We were getting pretty tired at this point. We'd been walking along all morning, and it didn't seem like we were getting any closer to the actual forest. The narrow country lanes, flanked on each side by wildly overgrown hedgerows, were beginning to look all identical. As frustration grew, some of the students began to argue over which route we should have taken. After an entire day's worth of walking, we had finally reached the end of the road. The tarmac was cracked and weathered, grass sprouted through the tiny fissures in the surface. It was here that the road literally and physically ended, swallowed up by nature as the vast sprawling forest opened up ahead of us. It struck me as deeply unnerving seeing a road so inexplicably abandoned. It was primeval. Millions of huge, dense pines that spread out before us like an ocean of dark green. I'd never seen anything quite like it in my life. By this point, the sun was beginning to sink towards the horizon, transforming the sky's deep blue into magnificent shades of pink and orange. Despite being hungry, thirsty, and disgustingly sweat-soaked from our exertions, we decided to push on. We had to. After all, darkness was drawing near. Moving through the forest itself was hard work. Pine needles dug into exposed flesh while small biting insects feasted on us, causing huge itchy welts. Walking behind someone meant that thin, spiky branches would whip back into your face. Sometimes we would find a little clearing. Somewhere the trees opened up a little and we would get a good look at just where we were. It was an ancient, ethereal forest, beds of moss spreading out before us. Mr. Lennon remarked that we must have been 15 to 20 miles away from the nearest piece of farmland, even further from the nearest village. It was agonizing. Even the country boys were beginning to complain, so upon reaching the first real clearing in the thick pines, we began to set up camp. The gorgeous golden sunset had become a ceiling of twinkling stars. We organized our camp, opting for a meager dinner of packed sandwiches. We were worn out. Hacking our way through the pines had left us well and truly fatigued, but this place was beautiful. It was untouched. Or so we thought. It started that night. A thunderous noise echoed through the trees around us, something that broke the ominous stillness of the death-saturated clearing. A deep, otherworldly howl, unlike anything I had ever heard before or since, assaulted my ears. I felt nauseous with fear, like I might regurgitate my measly breakfast all over the forest floor. As the roar died down and that horrible silence returned once again, we could hear the rustling of pines, the crunching of dry twigs and pine needles in the near distance. Something was coming for us. Students screamed and cried, hiding away in their sleeping bags or just plain panicking. A buddy of mine came rushing up to me, a look of pure terror in his eyes.
Mr. Lennon is gone. I tried looking for him, but I can't find him anywhere. We need to find Mr. Lennon.
We ran blindly through the pines as stray branches and bramble thorns scratched and sliced any exposed flesh. Exhaustion didn't seem to be a factor anymore. Neither was the weight of our backpacks. We tore through the forest at breakneck speeds, fear and adrenaline providing strength and stamina that seemed almost impossible. Eventually, I saw something through the inky blackness of the night, something illuminated by a shaft of pale moonlight. There were huge pine trees, twisted and deformed, their roots and limbs winding together in a kind of arcing cradle. Beneath them, a large shallow pit that had been cut away from the earth. Every inch was filled with bones. Entire rib cages jutted out from the soil like animal traps. Long femurs, yellowed and broken with age, were arranged into intricate patterns in the earth beneath us. Centipedes and lice crawled out from the open eye sockets of cracked skulls, their jaws hanging open in a silent scream of death. There must have been hundreds, if not thousands, of human remains half buried in the earth before us. As my eyes returned to the twisted mass of branches and roots above us, I noticed a dull glittering among the network of woven tree limbs. Withered steel helmets, still with a few slivers of red plumage, brass jewelry that had been intricately stitched into the patchwork of dry bones. Roman coins, more than 1,000 years old, were pressed so hard into the dying timber that the trees were growing up and around them, half consuming the small pieces of bronze. Kneeling before it all was a shirtless, hunched figure, its torso tattooed with strange ethereal designs. They were roughly inked, not the word of a professional artist. No, they were crude, ritualistic images. The figure was whispering something soft but rabid, repeating the same few sentences over and over in a guttural, ancient-sounding language. The howls were louder now, closer to the camp. The thing was circling the students like hunters surrounding their quarry, iron-willed patience the only thing preventing them from commencing the slaughter. In absolute terror, I crept closer towards the prostrate figure, instantly recognizing who it was when I saw their face. It was Mr. Lennon. He was praying.
Mr. Lennon!
I roared, taking him by the bare shoulder and trying to shake him from his trance.
Mr. Lennon, sir! We need your help, please, I'm begging you. Please, just help us.
I was so scared that I could feel tears forming in my eyes, my voice cracking with the insanity of the situation unfolding around us.
Sir, wake up!
I smacked Mr. Lennon around the side of his head, finally freeing him from his daze. He flinched violently, coming to and looking around as if he'd forgotten where he was. As he did so, the house subsided. He stood there, the silence descending back around us, still panting from our terrified exertions. No one ever talked about the incident in the woods, or how it was that such a terrifying experience ended as quickly as it began. Some of the students who returned from the Scotland trip were treated for symptoms of post-traumatic stress, but they could never bring themselves to talk about the night that had them suffering so terribly. Nor did anyone discuss how Mr. Lennon's mysterious actions that night had undoubtedly saved us from a fate worse than death. But I hadn't forgotten, and I'll never forget. Mr. Lennon saved our souls that night, and we can never repay him for it. My secondary school was old. When you're a kid, everything that was around before you were born is old, but the Blue Coat School for Boys was practically ancient. Founded in 1708 by the Reverend Robert Stithe, he envisioned the school as an institution for teaching poor children to read, write, and cast accounts. Constructed from huge sandstone blocks with neoclassical Georgian masonry, the school stands in stark contrast to the modern cityscape that sprung up around it. Passing the entrance exam and attending the school was as exhilarating as it was intimidating. Discipline was harsh, but the benefits were many. The feeling I got whenever I walked into the old Gothic-looking library building was magical. It was a place at a time. The smell of old books and wood varnish made me feel like I was privy to all kinds of ancient secrets, forbidden knowledge fit only for the eyes of the intellectually elite. It was perusing the time-worn shelves that I came across the book known as The King in Yellow. It stood out among the dusty leather bindings thanks to its mustard yellow cover. Sliding the old tome out from its snug space on the shelf, I opened it to be greeted by a strange, pale yellow symbol on the inside. I had to squint at first, straining my eyes to make out just what the odd sign was, turning the page as my head began to hurt. The printed text overleaf was tiny, so small that I could barely read it. This made my headache even worse. I closed the book, rubbed my eyes, then placed it inside my bag for later perusal.